My name is Brooke Wheeler, and for my English 112 final, I'm going to discuss perfectionism and Nathaniel Hawthorne's story entitled The Birthmark. The Birthmark is a short story that fits under Nathaniel Hawthorne's category of dark romanticism. Hawthorne's eerie life inspired his literary pieces to include themes of evil and sin, moral messages, and psychological complexity. In order to understand the dark principles behind Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Birthmark, we must look into his background. Hawthorne was born 1804 in Salem, Massachusetts. He had some family issues. His father died while he was young, and he was actually related to several of the judges in the Salem witch trials. So in order to escape that dark path, Hawthorne changed his last name and added a W to it in order to try and get away from his past. While Hawthorne was young, he experienced a severe leg injury, which left him immobile and inside of his house. And so a lot of researchers think that that's the reason why he was so involved with writing, and that was the time period in which he became so adamant and so just involved, was during that time when he couldn't play with other children. Upon graduating from university, Hawthorne spent roughly 12 years back in Salem, Massachusetts with his mother, and looking back on these 12 years, Hawthorne described them as, quote, a period of dreamlike isolation and solitude spent in a haunted room, and that came from Nathaniel Hawthorne biography. It is clear that these 12 years had an impact on Hawthorne's writing style, since some of his more unique stories and sketches were created during this time period. According to Nathaniel Hawthorne biography, many biographers believed that this time period of loneliness was where Hawthorne began to shift from romanticism to dark romanticism. The Birthmark shows us just how dark and twisted the crevices of Hawthorne's mind can be. To begin, The Birthmark is generally classified as a romantic short story, but as stated, the dark elements are incorporated more than in some of his other stories. In The Birthmark, a scientist and a philosopher named Almer dropped his career and experiments to marry the love of his life, Georgiana. Georgiana is considered perfect, except she has a small birthmark on her cheek. As the story progresses, it is clear that Almer is becoming obsessed with this birthmark that's on Georgiana's cheek and the perfection that it brings. Throughout the text, it is clear that he keeps harassing Georgiana. He won't stop thinking about this simple birthmark, and it's described as it looks like a hand on her cheek, but it's very small. And to the public, Georgiana was considered physically perfect, and there were even numerous men who adored the birthmark, thought it made her more beautiful. There were male admirers who would risk their lives to kiss the very thing that Almer finds repulsive. That came from page 7. It is also mentioned that some of Georgiana's female peers believe the birthmark ruins her beauty instead of enhancing it like the males believe.
In today's society, perfectionism is still viewed as a major aspect to a person's physical makeup, especially among teenagers and young adults. But in Hawthorne's society, perfectionism was much more prevalent. In Hawthorne's time period, women's main duty were to cook, clean, and take care of the children. According to Wick, women had no value other than those specific duties, so other people's impressions of them essentially came from their looks. On the other hand, in present day, women have much larger roles in society, so physical perfectionism is not viewed as greatly as it was in the 1800s. Obsession is one characteristic of Almer that Hawthorne makes sure to put on full display during The Birthmark. Such evidence of his obsession with Georgiana's birthmark is shown in the quote, in this matter, selecting it as a symbol of his wife's liability to sin, sorrow, decay, and death, Almer's sober imagination was not long in rendering the birthmark a frightful object, causing him more trouble and horror than Georgiana's beauty, whether of soul and sense, had given him delight. Page 7 of Birthmark. In this quote, Hawthorne's dark elements are brought into the story. Almer relates his wife's birthmark to sin, death, and gruesome matter, rather than just accepting the fact that it's a part of her and it's not going to change.
During the specific dream that Almer had, he dreamt that he was actually cutting the birthmark from his wife's cheek. And this again shows the obsession he had over this simple birthmark. The birthmark, again, is the dark romantic story that allows audience to step inside the twisted and dark reality of obsession. Hawthorne grew up with the haunting past of his ancestors, which could contribute to the love for dark stories. In a way, Hawthorne's story still holds true to today's society. For example, modern-day perfectionists could be related to characters in the story since they are often sucked into the invariable void of obsessing over achieving perfectionism in both themselves and anything involving them. As shown in the birthmark, perfectionism is never truly achieved, for the definition of perfectionism varies on individual basis. In closure, it is important to remember that achieving perfectionism will not always make you happy, and that sometimes achieving a definition of perfectionism comes with deadly consequences.